Do you believe some places were designed to remain forever unvisited? That certain doors exist solely to stay locked? The world harbors secrets so obscure that only a handful of people have encountered them, and even fewer have lived to process what they witnessed. The Vatican stands as one such location. Beyond its status as the Sacred Heart of Catholicism, beyond the religious narratives and architectural grandeur, it conceals chambers that clergy members themselves claim ignorance about. One particular room carries an absolute prohibition against entry for staff and unauthorized individuals alike. What could warrant such extreme secrecy? The testimony comes from Domênico Altieri, a former custodian who spent over a decade cleaning the museums, churches, and clerical residences. He believed he knew every corner of that sacred territory until a personal invitation arrived, the kind that perhaps should have been refused despite the threat of termination or ecclesiastical punishment. His account challenges comfortable assumptions about what institutions preserve in their deepest layers. During 12 years as Vatican maintenance staff, Altieri learned that certain doors demand to be ignored, particularly those that seem to whisper for someone to open them. His name never mattered to the institution. He was hired for work nobody wanted. The basements, archive tunnels, technical corridors, and suffocating rooms where silence carried more weight than the stale air itself. The dust in those spaces wasn't mere dirt but sediment from decades of buried knowledge. On a winter night, a shift supervisor summoned him without paperwork or protocol. The man simply pointed toward locker 3 and stated the essentials. Key inside, old room, clean it, leave. Altieri never questioned such orders. Survival in that environment required knowing when to remain silent. Yet when he saw the key number, an inexplicable discomfort crept through him, something that transcended the temperature. That room appeared on none of his routine maps, existed in no internal documentation of the subterranean sectors. Officially, it simply wasn't there. The key, however, waited in the locker as proof of its reality. He followed the described path with attention. The corridor belonged to a section rarely accessed. Damp stone walls seemed to murmur as he passed. Ceiling lights flickered not from electrical malfunction but as though hesitating to illuminate what lay ahead. At the corridor's end, a stone staircase spiraled downward. He counted 43 steps, a number that remains burned into his memory. As he descended, his footfalls sounded muffled as if the space itself refused to echo. The tunnel beyond was brief, dark, saturated with moisture. Irregular stone slabs threatened his footing with each step. The door waited at the end, heavy wood, no markings, no number. Despite the ancient lock, the key turned smoothly, suggesting recent use. When he pushed the door open, cold wasn't the first sensation. Smell arrived first, an impossible mixture of aged paper, rotting wood, and something chemical. Formaldehyde. The kind of odor that flesh recognizes before consciousness catches up. The atmosphere felt wrong. Walls draped in faded red fabric, nearly black in patches, absorbed what little light the weak ceiling fixtures produced. Shadows stretched beyond reasonable dimensions. A smooth stone structure dominated the center like an altar. What paralyzed him were the 5 display cases arranged in a semicircle around that central platform. Reinforced glass, thick and deliberate, suggested this was no ordinary exhibition. Inside them, creatures. Not animals, not statues. Preserved bodies, abnormally tall, bearing impossible anatomical features. One had eyes sewn shut with golden thread. Another displayed bones on the outside of its frame, as though its skeleton had been inverted. He stood frozen, unable to decide between fleeing and approaching. Then he noticed something worse. The 5th case stood empty. Not damaged or neglected. Empty, spotlessly clean. That absence, that space where something should exist but didn't, triggered a deeper terror than the preserved specimens ever could. He didn't scream or run, but he understood immediately that he had opened something forbidden. Something was missing, and worse, it might not be far away. Tearing his eyes from that vacant case took effort, not from curiosity but from fear. The kind that grows in silence like fungus in a sealed cellar. The empty space seemed to be waiting for something or someone, yet simultaneously felt recently vacated, forcing him to concentrate on breathing. When he managed to survey the rest of the chamber, He realized it wasn't abandoned. It was alive. Niches carved into stone walls housed humanoid sculptures. No two matched. All held rigid poses, arms extended as if guarding something precious. The forms were primitive, exaggerated. None resembled Christian sacred imagery, nor Greek, Roman, or Egyptian iconography. These predated all known traditions. Some wore light fabric coverings while others stood exposed, revealing fine cracks across torsos and faces. Several had missing parts, chunks torn from faces, broken hands, eyes carved out and removed. Others remained pristine, polished, exceptionally preserved, surfaces gleaming. No plaques, no names, nothing indicating origin, era, or function. Yet a sensation persisted, being watched. Not paranoia. He felt it through skin rather than mind. Those sculptures knew he occupied their space. As he moved slowly among them, their hollow eyes tracked his passage. Not tricks of perspective or light play. Something older than faith itself, colder than marble, observed him from within those forms. At the room's far end, opposite the display cases, a dark wooden table held several stone cylinders resembling ancient transport capsules. Inside each one, genuine papyri, some rolled with leather ties, others partially open to reveal texts in Latin, Hebrew, and languages he couldn't identify. Handwritten annotations covered margins, numbers scribbled like inventory codes. Beside the scrolls sat a worn leather journal. Pages overflowed with circular symbols, manual diagrams, anatomical drawings unlike anything in medical textbooks. Some figures suggested bodies, others maps. One page arrested his attention completely. It showed the exact layout of this chamber. Altar, display cases, sculptures, everything rendered in a floor plan. With one crucial difference. In the illustration, the fifth case wasn't empty. A body appeared there, drawn in fetal position with what resembled folded wings draped over itself. The caption, written in black ink, contained a single Latin word, restituendum. It must be returned. At that moment, the air became physically heavier. Not metaphorically. The atmosphere turned dense as though oxygen had been drained away. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight, hands slicked with sudden sweat. He glanced around and swears the sculpture's shadows had shifted position. He closed the journal without sound and retreated 2 steps. Then he saw what stopped him again. On a low stand beside the table, arranged on thin cloth, lay 2 ancient swords. Curved blades, weathered by time but still sharp. Metallic inscriptions ran along their surfaces in an alien language, letters that seemed organic, almost living. No known alphabet. One sword showed a worn grip, but the other retained dried blood on its blade. Not fresh, yet not ancient enough to be forgotten either. Dust hadn't completely covered it. Someone had handled this weapon recently. He understood then that this room wasn't storage. It was a laboratory or something darker, a sanctuary. And it wasn't sealed. It was waiting. Have you ever sensed something approaching while everyone around you remains oblivious? This reaches beyond the Vatican or hidden chambers. It concerns everything accumulating beneath the surface while we stay distracted, pretending normalcy prevails. Those statues, those forgotten records, those shadows that relocate without explanation, they're merely fragments of a vastly larger pattern. People assume institutions like the Vatican function as museums of the past, preserving what's dead and documenting what's finished. But what if preservation serves a different purpose entirely? What if certain artifacts are kept not because they're historical but because they're waiting for something, a specific moment, a particular alignment, a condition not yet met? He looked again at the 5th case, the empty space, the motionless reflection in clean glass. He never imagined absence could disturb more than presence. A strange compulsion pulled him closer. Not curiosity exactly, but a species of silent attraction, as if that space demanded completion or awakening. He stopped centimeters from the glass. That's when he saw what almost made him recoil. At the bottom corner, adhered to the base, a small piece of aged paper bore handwritten Latin script, Nandos Tempis. Wait, but the hour hasn't arrived. Who or what was waiting? He didn't dare touch the glass, but approached near enough to notice something more unsettling still. The surface felt warm. Not hot, but warm, like someone had just breathed against it, as though something lived inside or perhaps still did. His head began spinning. The room's smell intensified. The presence of those creatures in their cases seemed to expand. Ceiling lights wavered. Then he heard a sound, subtle, muffled, behind him. Not footsteps exactly, not hurried, but light, dragging, as if someone or something was sliding across stone flooring. He turned immediately. Nothing. When he returned his gaze to the fifth case, the glass had fogged as though something inside had exhaled against it. That shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy. He backed away rapidly, hands trembling. The wall sculptures appeared closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Trying to recover his breath, he glanced toward the door and spotted a small metallic gleam on the floor, a round object nearly hidden between two loose stones. He crouched immediately. A dark metal button. It bore an engraved symbol, two spheres interlinked by an oblique line. He'd seen that symbol on the altar, on the journal's cover, and now here on the floor. The restricted access seal, identical to one he'd glimpsed years ago on a file that should never have been opened. According to rumors from former employees, that symbol didn't belong to the church. It predated ecclesiastical authority entirely. The button appeared to be from some uniform. Someone had occupied this chamber at some point. The disturbing part wasn't the button itself, but realizing the stone concealing it bore drag marks, as if something had been pushed, suggesting something lay underneath. He knelt, felt along the edge, and pushed. The slab yielded several millimeters, revealing a dark hole with steps spiraling downward. Another hidden passage, another buried layer. He remained motionless for several instants, listening. From the depths came a faint voice, muffled yet strangely familiar. It didn't sound human, yet it spoke his name. Domenico. For a moment, reason attempted protection through logical explanations. Perhaps delirium, perhaps echoes of ancient thoughts, or worse, his own mind attempting self-sabotage. But no. The voice repeated with clarity. Domenico. No accent, no static, as though it already knew him intimately. Kneeling beside the opening, his body froze. Heart hammering, fingers clutching the metal button with its engraved symbol, the same one appearing throughout this place. The pact, the chamber, the symbol, everything connected. The dark spiral beneath his feet wasn't merely a physical path. It was a silent warning. Proceeding meant no return existed. Yet he understood. Retreating now would render everything he'd lived through meaningless. He retrieved a small flashlight from his uniform pocket and illuminated the hole's interior. The steps were narrow, worn smooth by time. A dense, humid smell rose from below, not mold but the presence of something ancient, an odor carrying history in its molecules. He descended slowly, counting as always. 32 steps. He reached a corridor even narrower, with a low ceiling and curved walls appearing hand-excavated. Silence was absolute, yet his name continued echoing inside him. The voice wasn't beside him. It occupied him from within. The tunnel terminated at a heavy metal door unlike the previous one, featuring a double lock and a small barred window. Beyond it, a circular room smaller than the red chamber but infinitely more disturbing. Walls were covered with symbols drawn by hand using dark pigment resembling charcoal, but something about them seemed wrong. They appeared to pulse. The forms belonged to no known symbolic system. At the room's center sat a chair. Not an ordinary chair but a restraint chair with thick leather straps on arms and legs. The wood bore claw marks, the backrest slightly inclined, recalling a tilted cross. Against the curved wall rested a glass structure, an empty tank, but the glass interior walls were stained as if something had been maintained there, something that struggled violently. Beside the chair sat something even more disconcerting, an ancient mirror, round, with an iron frame corroded by time. But the reflection wasn't his. He looked once, twice, 3 times, blinked, approached closer. There, reflected behind him, stood a figure. Face shrouded in shadows, motionless, observing. He spun immediately. Nothing. The space behind him was empty. He looked back at the mirror. Now yes, the reflection showed him. But something had changed. At the frame's lower corner appeared a scratch, a fresh mark, a symbol, the same one from the button. Everything was being marked. The button, the mirror, the chamber, and him. On the wall, a partially erased phrase remained legible. He who descends doesn't return with what he carried. He returns different. He remained there for long minutes, seated on the floor, attempting to comprehend whether he'd already crossed the line. The answer manifested in his body. Shoulders weighed down, flashlight flickering despite full battery. Strangest of all, the button in his pocket was heating up, reacting to the environment as though recognizing the location. Breakfast tasted the same. The number 27 bus followed its usual route. The Vatican dome still gleamed in sunlight. Bells rang at their appointed hours. But he knew. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. Silence seemed denser, colleagues' glances quicker, his routine more constrained. He began dreaming of the chamber, not of the creatures but of that disturbing emptiness. The fifth case haunted him, that void demanding attention yet offering no answers. The dreams persisted for years until eventually people stopped asking and he stopped explaining. Did Domênico Altieri actually witness these things? Was it genuine experience or an exaggerated account crafted to capture media attention? Attention that never materialized since no journalist cared what a custodian claimed? If those creatures were extraterrestrial bodies, why would they rest in the Vatican rather than a remote military facility? Does this chamber genuinely exist somewhere beneath sacred ground? And ultimately, what became of Domênico Altieri himself? The narrative could stem from remarkably vivid imagination, yet something about it resonates beyond fiction. The sensations it provokes, the shivers it generates, suggest dimensions of truth that rational dismissal cannot adequately address. Consider what it means if even a fraction proved accurate. Consider what institutions preserve in their deepest levels, what they catalog without ever displaying, what they guard with silence rather than gates. The Vatican's archives extend across miles of shelving, containing documents that won't be accessible for centuries. Official explanations cite privacy concerns and historical sensitivity, but those justifications only cover surface material, the items eventually intended for scholarly review. What about the chambers with no documentation, the corridors absent from architectural plans, the rooms that exist between official spaces like gaps in a manuscript? Every ancient institution harbors these voids. They're not accidents of construction or oversights in record-keeping. They're intentional, designed into the structure's blueprint, maintained through careful non-acknowledgement. Staff members learn quickly which doors to ignore, which questions never to ask, which inconsistencies to accept as normal. That learned blindness becomes a condition of employment, an unspoken requirement more fundamental than any written contract. The restraint chair Altieri described, the stained tank, the pulsing symbols on walls. These aren't elements of religious tradition. They belong to something older, practices that predate organized theology, methods that Christianity absorbed and buried rather than destroyed. Ancient priesthoods understood forces that modern religion has forgotten or deliberately obscured. What early church fathers encountered in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and places whose names no longer exist, they didn't always reject. Sometimes they incorporated, concealed, preserved for purposes never recorded in canonical texts. The Vatican's foundation stones rest on layers of Roman temples, which themselves covered Etruscan sacred sites, which replaced even earlier ritual grounds. Each civilization built atop previous secrets, adding their own, creating a vertical archive of hidden knowledge. That fifth empty case occupies the imagination precisely because absence carries more weight than presence. An artifact can be examined, categorized, explained away. But an empty space designated for something specific, something important enough to warrant reinforced glass and a position in a forbidden chamber, that emptiness poses questions no examination can resolve. Where did the contents go? When? Under whose authority? For what purpose? The Latin inscription, "It must be returned," suggests the vacancy is temporary, that whatever occupied that space will eventually be restored to it. Returned by whom? Returned from where? The phrasing implies the object wasn't destroyed or lost but relocated, move to another location while maintaining its essential relationship to this chamber, this configuration of artifacts and symbols. The button Altieri found, that small metal object bearing the interlinked spheres, functions as a kind of key or marker. Not for opening physical locks but for identifying those who belong to a certain order, a group existing parallel to official church hierarchy. Ecclesiastical structures everyone recognizes, cardinals and bishops and the visible apparatus of Catholic authority, they represent one system. But within and beneath that system operates another organization entirely, one with different objectives, different knowledge, different obligations. The symbol appears on documents predating Christianity, suggesting continuity of purpose across millennia. Whatever that purpose entails, it requires maintaining chambers like the one Altieri stumbled into, preserving specimens and artifacts that official history cannot acknowledge, monitoring conditions that ordinary clergy never suspect. The voice calling his name from the depths represents the most troubling element of his account. Technology can't explain it. Acoustics can't produce that effect. What calls to someone by name from a sealed chamber beneath the Vatican? What intelligence operates in those spaces, aware enough to identify individuals, purposeful enough to summon them deeper? The voice didn't threaten. It didn't command. It simply stated his name, recognizing him, acknowledging his presence in a space he was never meant to access. That recognition implies awareness, implies these chambers aren't merely storage but active environments, places where something waits and watches and occasionally reaches out.